Welcome to Brew Cheese, where we brew up the finest of cheese. And today I'm bringing you a second deck tech for Torbran, Thane of Redfell. When researching the last video, it was apparent that Torbran is an extremely versatile red commander. Although the previous deck focused on spell slinging, it looks like a lot of folks on EDH Rec took Torbran in the direction I first envisioned for him, and that's stacks, using pieces like mana barbs to punish opponents a lot more than us. But besides spell slinging and stacks, there is another role in which Torbran excels, and that's at the helm of a token deck. Why? Well, Torbran does his best when he can apply his 2 damage bonus multiple times in a round, and one of the best ways to do that is to swarm other players with small tokens, effectively giving them all a +2 bump to their power. There will be several points in this video where I mention damage values printed on a card, and if I read them off as too higher than they are, it's because I'm including the commander's increase. Of course, to get there, we'll need to ramp up some. I chose Commander's Sphere, Mind Stone, and Hedron Archive, because if we no longer need them, they can be sacrificed for additional card draw. Something red is sorely lacking. The Sphere costs 3 and taps for just red. Mind Stone is an artifact that costs for 2 and taps for a colorless, and the Archive costs 4 and taps for 2. Unstable Obelisk costs 3 and taps for a colorless, and also gives us a late game option to get rid of something like an enchantment or a massive creature, things red typically has problems dealing with, letting us pay 7 and sacrificing it to destroy any permanent. Pyramid of the Pantheon is a bit of a slow build for an artifact, but it's worth it. It costs 1 and lets you pay 2 into it and tap it to add a mana of any color, and we put a brick counter on it. Once it has 3 of those counters on it, we can instead tap it for 3 mana. It's like a Gilded Lotus that we can pay for in installments. If your playgroup is fond of blowing up artifacts or bouncing permanents, however, then feel free to swap this out. In my playgroup, however, this is an amazing card. Corrupted Gravestone costs 2, enters tapped, and taps for any color, so long as a card in your yard has that color. We have a fair number of instants and sorceries in the deck to get a red card in the graveyard, so this isn't too much trouble. Star Compass costs 2, also enters tapped, and taps for a color one of our lands can produce. Spoiler alert, that's just red in this deck. These inclusions may seem odd, but the goal is to have some 2 mana or less artifacts that tap for red over colorless. One such artifact, Iron Mirror, also costs 2 and taps for red. This is also another creature for the deck to attack with if we want to, but since it's not red, then our commander won't boost its damage output. Runaway Steamkin is a red and 1 for a 1/1 elemental, and it gets a +1/+1 counter every time we cast a red spell, so long as there's not already 3 or more of those counters on it. We can remove 3 counters from it to generate 3 red. In a pinch, this is another red source of damage for the deck, but its primary role is just to generate bursts of red mana. Mana Geyser is 2 red and 3 for a sorcery, and it adds a red for each tapped land our opponents control. A staple of red ramp, Geyser can either win big or not even produce enough mana to cover its own casting cost, depending on the round and how many opponents like playing at instant speed just before their turn. Most of the time, however, this card wins big on how much mana it generates. Battle Hymn costs a red and 1 for an instant, and it gives us 1 red for each creature we control. Although not as useful early game, once we've built up some tokens, this can easily net us a load of mana. Our draw package features a lot of familiar faces, but that's because they're some of the best that red has to offer. First up is Outpost Siege, a red and 3 enchantment that serves a dual purpose in this deck, either giving us an extra card to play until end of turn if we choose the cons mode, or damaging an opponent or creature for 3 when one of our creatures dies, thanks to our commander's damage boost. Chandra Fire Artisan and Pyromaster are both Chandra Planeswalkers for 2 red and 2, and both have 4 loyalty when they enter. Most relevant here, they can both be used to exile a card off our library, and we can play it until end of turn. Fire Artisan deals damage boosted by Torbran every time a counter is removed from her, and can be -7 to exile 7 cards for us to play this turn. Pyromaster can be +1 to deal 3 damage to a player and to a creature they control, and that creature can't block this turn. She can also be -7 to exile the top 10 of your library and copy an instant or sorcery from it 3 times. Since we have several spells in the deck that make tokens, this can be an extremely useful ultimate. Experimental Frenzy is a red and 3 enchantment that lets us look at and play the top card of our library, but we can't play cards from our hand. This says nothing about casting cards from exile, so it doesn't negatively impact the others. Dark Dweller Oracle is a red and 1 for a 2/2 Goblin Shaman, and she lets us pay 1 and sack a creature to exile the top card of our library, and we can play it this turn. Not only is this repeatable, we can often sacrifice 1 token to be able to play something that generates 2 or more tokens, giving us a net gain overall. Ghirapur Orrery is 4 for an artifact, and it provides a symmetrical effect, letting all players play an extra land and draw 3 cards on their upkeep if they're empty-handed. Since most of our draw effects don't put any cards in our hand, this second effect applies to us much more often than our opponents, and the first ability lets us play extra lands when we have 2 or more of them exiled with our other effects. Siege Gang Commander kicks off our token generation and the first in a long line of Goblin tribal effects. It turns out when you need red creature tokens, red has a lot of goblins to offer to fit that bill. It's 2 red and 3 for a 2/2 goblin, and it brings 3 of its 1/1 goblin pals with it. For red and 1, we can sack a goblin to have this deal 4 damage to any target. I don't need to tell you what a great deal this is, letting us sack 10 goblins to take an opponent from full health to nothing. Beetleback Chief is 2 red and 2 for a 2/2 goblin warrior, and it brings 2 1/1 goblins to the party with it. Mog War Marshal is a red and 1 for a 1/1 goblin warrior, and it makes a 1/1 goblin when it enters the battlefield or when it dies. We do have to pay its echo cost if we want it to stick around, but considering he leaves behind a token, we're not too worried about that if we can't afford it. Goblin Rabblemaster is a red and 2 for a 2/2 goblin warrior, and he makes all of our other goblins attack each turn, makes a 1/1 goblin with haste at the beginning of combat, and whenever he joins the fray, he gets +1 to his power for each other attacking goblin. Legion Warboss is a red and 2 for a 2/2 goblin soldier. He has Mentor, meaning that when he attacks, he puts a +1/+1 counter on a smaller attacking creature. He also gives us a 1/1 goblin token with haste on our combat step, and the token has to attack. Krenko 10 Street Kingpin is a red and 2 for a 1/2 goblin that gets a +1/+1 counter when it attacks, and when it does attack, we make a 1/1 goblin for each point of power it has. If this thing survives, it turns into a veritable goblin factory in no time. Pashalik Mons is also a red and 2 for a 2/2 goblin warrior, and when it or another goblin we control dies, it deals 3 damage to any target thanks to our commander. We can also pay a red and 3 and sack a goblin to make 2 more goblin tokens. Goblin Instigator is a red and 1 for a 1/1 goblin rogue, and it brings a 1/1 goblin friend with it. Young Pyromancer marks the beginning of the non-goblin token creators, but don't worry, they'll be back. He's a red and 1 for a 2/1 human shaman, and whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we get a 1/1 elemental out of the bargain. There are plenty of spells in the deck, most of which make us tokens, so getting an extra token out of the deal is definitely worth the inclusion. Hanweir Garrison, it's a red and 2 for a 2/3 human soldier. When it attacks, we create 2 1/1 red human tokens that attack with it. These tokens don't go anywhere at the end of combat or the end of turn, so the garrison is capable of cranking out a lot of tokens over its lifetime. Dragon Master Outcast is a single red for a 1/1 human shaman. At our upkeep, if we have 6 or more lands, something very easy to do in a game of Commander, we create a 5/5 red flying dragon token. Tilinali's Summoner is a red and 1 for a 1/1. It's also a human shaman, and it has Ascend, meaning we gain a state called the City's Blessing if we have 10 or more permanents, something extremely easy to accomplish in a token deck. When she attacks, we can pay a red and X to make X 1/1 red elemental tokens that are also attacking. We keep these tokens at the end of the turn if we have the City's Blessing, but even if we don't, the Summoner brings some major firepower combined with Torbran. I should also mention that the tokens she makes count toward Ascend, so with even a small investment into X, we can hit it easily. Scampering Scorcher is a 1/1 elemental for a red and 3, and when it enters the battlefield, it creates 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. It also gives all of your elementals haste that turn, so it and its 2 friends can all swing in out of nowhere. The first of our token-making spells is Hordeling Outburst, which costs 2 red and 1 for a sorcery, and it creates 3 1/1 red goblins. Dragon Fodder and Krenko's Command are more or less the same card, both costing a red and 1 for a sorcery, and both creating 2 goblin tokens. Empty the Warrens is a red and 3, also for a sorcery, and it creates 2 red goblin tokens. It also has Storm, meaning we copy it for each spell cast before it that turn. Goblin Rally is a sorcery for 2 red and 3, and it creates 4 1/1 goblin tokens for our board. Goblin War Party is a red and 3 for a sorcery, and we can choose to either create 3 goblin tokens or give all of our creatures +1/+1 in haste until end of turn. We can choose both if we pay an extra 2 and a red. 7 mana to create 3 tokens and pump up our entire team is not a bad deal. Considering with Torbran out, this spell alone accounts for 12 power on the turn it's cast. Goblin Slide is an enchantment for a red and 2, and it allows us to pay 1 anytime we cast a non-creature spell, and if we do, we create a 1/1 red goblin with haste. Similar to the Pyromancer, getting an extra token here and there can really add up. Molten Birth is 2 red and 1 for a sorcery, and it makes us 2 1/1 red elementals, and then we flip a coin. If we win that flip, we return Molten Birth to our hand to be cast again later. Mask of Immolation gives us both a little extra reach and gives us a token in the deal. It's a red and 1 for an artifact equipment, and it equips for 2. When it enters the battlefield, we create a 1/1 red elemental and auto-attach the mask to it. We can sack the creature the mask is attached to deal 1 damage, or 3 if Torbran is out, to any target. If we need to, we can attack with our tokens and sack them later that turn, or we can use this to get past Pillow Fort style defenses like Ghostly Prison or Propaganda, since it would cost a fortune to swing in with an army of tokens against either of these. Devil's Playground is 2 red and 4 for a sorcery, and it puts 4 1/1 red devils on our field, and each of them deal 1 damage to something when they die. Of course, that's 3 damage with Torbran. Combined with the mask, we could conceivably sack all 4 and deal 24 total damage, loosely divided however we want. Dual Casting is a creature enchantment aura for a red and 1 and a favorite card of mine. It gives the enchanted creature the ability to tap, and for the cost of a red, copy one of our instants or sorceries. With as many of those as we are running in the deck, making double the tokens from one of them makes Dual Casting a valuable inclusion. Break Through the Line kicks off a series of cards intended to get us past tighter defenses. It's a red and 1 for an enchantment, and it lets us pay a red to make a creature with power 2 or less unblockable, and gives it haste in the deal. This works great since Torbran doesn't directly influence the power of the creature. Cosmotronic Wave is a mini board wipe and a defense buster in 1. It deals 1 damage, or 3, to each of our opponent's creatures, and those creatures cannot block this turn. This card is great for slipping through a massive army to pull out a quick win. Goblin War Drums is a red and 2 for an enchantment, and it gives all of our creatures menace. With the sheer volume of our tokens, assigning 2 blockers to each of them is going to be all but impossible. War Cadence is a woefully underplayed card, and is fantastic in Commander. It's a red and 2 for an enchantment, and it lets us pay a red and X, and this turn, creatures cannot block unless their controller pays X for each creature they want to block with. This acts as a sort of reverse Ghostly Prison, where even an X value of 2 might be too much for some opponents to muster to block very many of our creatures. Impact Tremors is a staple of any token deck running red, but Torbran supersizes it. It's a red and 1 for an enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, or 3 with our commander. Many of our creatures and spells can make 3 or 4 bodies with 1 spell cast, so 9 to 12 damage to each opponent for each of those spells we cast is going to make this a nightmare. Chiron Negotiations is 2 red and 2, also for an enchantment, and it turns all of our creatures into pingers, letting us tap an untapped creature to have negotiations deal 1 or 3 damage to a player. Again, this is a great option for when attacking is out of the question. Cavalcade of Calamity, besides being just fun to say, is a red and 1 for an enchantment. Whenever one of our power 1 or less creatures attack, the Cavalcade deals 1 or 3 damage to the player that creature is attacking. Raid Bombardment is more or less the same, just costing 1 extra and allowing up to power 2. Again, both of these are great since Torbran doesn't directly affect power. Mirror March is a card suggested on one of our prior videos, and it slots in nicely here. For red and 5, we have an enchantment that whenever we have a non-token creature in our battlefield, we flip coins until we lose a flip. Then make a token copy with haste for each flip we won. Those copies go bye-bye at the end of the turn. If we cast something like Beetleback Chief, for instance, for each copy of the Chief we create 2 more goblins. And although the copies of the Chief go away at the end of the turn, we keep the goblin tokens that those copies created. Flame Shadow Conjuring is a red and 3 for an enchantment that provides a very similar effect to Mirror March. We can pay a red when we put out a non-token creature and create a 1-turn copy of that creature with haste. Although that copy goes away at the end of the turn, whatever tokens that copy makes will hang around. Goblin Oriflamme is a red and 1 for an enchantment, and it gives all of our attacking creatures +1/+0. In a similar vein is Ferocity of the Wilds, a red and 2 enchantment that gives our attacking non-human creatures +1/+0 and gives them trample. All of our creature tokens, except for a handful, are going to be non-human, so this will apply to most of them. Even with our removal package, we're still squeezing in a few more creatures. Release the Gremlins is double X in red for a sorcery, and it destroys X artifacts and creates X 2/2 red gremlin tokens. Viashino Heretic is a red and 2 for a 1/3 Viashino. It lets us pay a red and 1 to destroy an artifact, and then it deals to the artifact's controller damage equal to the CMC of the artifact. Abrade, once a powerhouse of standard, serves us just as well in Commander. It's a red and 1 for an instant, and we can choose to either deal 3 or 5 damage to a creature or destroy an artifact, making it flexible removal, which is always great to have. Another flexible removal piece is Destructive Tampering, a red and 2 for a sorcery. It lets us either destroy an artifact or makes it where creatures without flying cannot block this turn, giving us another avenue to get our army past blockers. Dizzying Gaze is another woefully underplayed card. It's a single red for a creature enchantment aura. For a single red in activation, it deals 1 damage, or 3, to a creature without flying. Even without Torbran out, we can easily take out all but the most massive of flyers on a reusable effect. It's an aura, so if the creature it's on gets destroyed, then we were 2 for 1, but if this card can force our opponents to have to use a removal piece on one of our 1/1 tokens, then it's well worth it. Chaos Warp is more or less red's only answer to things like enchantments or creatures too large to burn down. For red and 2, it's an instant that shuffles any permanent into its owner's library, and then they reveal the top card and get to play it for free if it's a permanent. Chain Reaction is a decent board wipe, but far more effective if we have some tokens out. For 2 red and 2, it's a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures out. This is also very effective with Torbran, adding 2 to the damage each of our opponent's creatures take. Earthquake is a red and X for a sorcery that deals X damage to each non-flying creature and each player. Of course, Torbran adds 2 to each of our opponent's damage and to each of their creatures, meaning we don't have to pay nearly as much into X to achieve the desired results. Along those same lines is Magma Quake, 2 red and X for an instant, and it hits each non-flying creature and each planeswalker for X damage. Starstorm is also 2 red and X for an instant, and it deals X damage to each creature, flying or not. We also have the option of cycling it away for 3 if we don't need it. Our mana base is composed of Dwarven Mine, a mountain that enters tapped unless we have 3 or more other mountains, and if it does enter untapped, we make a free 1/1 red dwarf creature token. The remainder of our mana base is just 35 mountains. The total cost of this Torbran-tacular deck clocks in at $20.03. The prices include cards of any condition found on TCG Player, not a sponsor, and of the cheapest printing of that card. Thank you for watching, and we hope you like the work that went into the new format. If there's anything we missed or something you'd like to see, please leave a comment, and of course, if you like what we're doing, share one of our videos or just tell a friend about it. Thank you again, and see you next video.